We've looked at a couple of women. We've looked at Sarah, and we have looked at Rebecca. What we see in common in both of them is a strong degree of faith. A strong sense also of things that needed to be done when they needed to be done. They may not have been done the way they ought to have been done, and they may have actually cut across their faith, but they were women of action. They were women who were busy. They were workers. They weren't the kind of individuals who stood off to the side and who weren't involved. Last night we talked about the different generations, all of the different struggles and challenges that they have had and will continue to have. We talked about also the weaknesses, the frailties, the challenges that seem to be characteristic of each of the generations. But you know, in any ecclesia, every one of the generations supplies something that is quite special. Sometimes ecclesias need the baby boomers to give the drive, the vigor, and the forward momentum that comes from the baby boomers. Sometimes, in times of trouble, in times of conflict, ecclesias need that special gift that the Generation X brothers and sisters have to bring peace and to calm the troubled waters of the ecclesia. There are times when the innovation, the imagination, the freshness, the vigor, the youth, the new thinking of Gen Y and Gen Z adds something special to the ecclesia so that it rethinks anew what it's doing and why it does what it does. And so that it has the chance to leverage things which it may not have thought of using prior. Technology, different ways of approaching the public outside, and ways also of bringing new life and vigor to what we do internally. So every one of the generations brings something into the equation for ecclesial life that works. There are times when the weaknesses that characterize one generation will irk another generation. And so when an older generation is about formality and structure and order, this can become very irksome to younger generation people. And in times of conflict like that, it's useful for us to think in terms of what's important to the generation of the brothers and sisters who would like things to be working in a particular way. When you understand what the veterans had to build, they were also called, not just the silent generation, but others have called them the greatest generation because of the rebuilding of the world after World War II. There are times when you have to remember, as a young person, that your old grandmother, grandfather, uncle, aunt grew up in a generation where order was reestablished out of disorder and chaos. And so for them, order is about being healthy, being, as far as the truth is concerned, focused and running well. And if you understand that about them, when you are dealing with what comes across as inflexibility, you can speak to them on the basis that we can still have health, orderliness, things done decently and in order if we do what we're suggesting to you. We know how important that is. And we don't ever want to do things that are disorderly, disrespectful, or that don't work. So please, work with us on this. And that way the generations are able to connect and work with each other. And the old brothers and sisters, the older ones, when they understand, the young people sometimes need to be able to try out or to propose an idea, which it won't break anything, it won't make things not work, but it might be worth trying to see, will this invigorate the ecclesia? The generations change. Things move from one generation to the next, and change is a constant for all generations. So Dinah was a young woman in the ecclesia, a young woman in the family of Jacob. She was the only girl, or at least the only one we hear about, the only daughter of Jacob. You can imagine that in the midst of this family, with all these brothers, and her father, and a battalion of servants, she would be like a princess in the midst of everyone. The likelihood is she might have been spoilt. If you had just one girl in all of that, just imagine how you would treat her. She'd be quite special. And to Mother Leah, as she watched the development of her boys, the sorrow and the sadness that would have given her, because you can see these things early. You don't wait until they're 25 to realize what kind of children you've raised. You can see it when they're 5, when they're 10, when they're teens. And as she saw what they did, you can imagine. And remember, all of this is about imagination. It may not be the way it was, but if it irritates you into thinking more deeply about the characters, then the job is being done. Maybe Leah was her hope, that of the children, this one might get it right. Maybe this was the one that she poured so much love, guidance, direction into. Maybe this was the one that she kept an eye on and put boundaries around and had a lot more control over, because she saw what had happened to the boys. And this was a girl in the family. So the natural inclination for the parents would be to put more controls around the girl to protect her. Did Dinah see on her mother's face all the marks of suffering, of sadness, of yearning? Leah only wanted one thing. She wanted Jacob to love her. Just that he would feel for her something close to what he felt for her sister. She knew she was the woman he had been tricked into marrying, and she knew that that would always be a barrier between him and her. But she loved him so much. She yearned for his love. Might a teenaged girl not disrespect that in her mother? Might she not be angry? Why do you have to be so needy? Why do you need him to need you? Why can't you just be yourself? Might she not have looked at her father with the way he managed the family, which was by not managing the family? By letting everything go. Like Isaac, he had withdrawn to his tent. His tent. It was bartered about like an animal between the women with mandrakes. He couldn't get the boys under control. And he threw himself into his work to the extent that he might have just exhausted himself in the field, so that when he came back to his tent, he just went to sleep, ate, went to sleep, and tuned out the family. When Dinah looked at her father, what did she think? That's the kind of man you are yearning for? You're dying for his love? He's not even a man. What kind of man is my dad? He's not in control of anything. Look at the way the boys behave. And he doesn't do anything. He doesn't say anything. Is it possible that Dinah, had in her some of the strong will, the iron, the steel that Sarah had in her, that Rebecca had in her? Sharing the same bloodline, the same strands of DNA that could be found in her grandmother and her great-grandmother. And with a girl with a strength of will that she might have had, that she had inherited, that was in her naturally, and with the perceptiveness that the women in this family clearly had, the depth of insight into people and what motivates them, what triggers their behaviors, the way they are. Just think about Rebecca and how she managed that situation in the deception of Isaac. She knew him so well, and she knew her son. If Dinah had that kind of depth of perception, how would she see the ecclesia? What did it look like to her? To you and me, thousands of years after reading this story, it's where God is preserving His truth. In the midst of all the families of the earth, it's in this one crazy, dysfunctional, ineffective, not really working well family that He was preserving His truth. What did Dinah see when she looked out across her family? She saw 4 sets of families. 2 wives, 2 servants. She saw the boys continually beating each other up in order to establish who was greater and who was lesser. She saw the violence that seems to have developed in her own brothers, her flesh and blood brothers. She saw an ineffective father, and she saw an ineffective mother. And when she looked at all that, might she not have thought to herself, there's no love in this place. These people say they believe something about the future and what we're going to become, and look at the way they treat each other. How could I even think that these people have the truth? There are young people that sometimes look at us as mums and dads, and that's what they think about us. They look at our ecclesias and all the warring and fighting that we all fall prey to, and they ask the same questions. Is it any wonder that it starts by saying, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. You know, for a girl in a family that moved back and forth all over the place, was continually sojourning, what might she yearn for? A life where you were just in one place. One place. Securely in one place for the rest of your life. When you're continually on the move, that's what you yearn for. She looked out at the world. She could see in the interactions of the world with Abraham, with Jacob and his family, what the men looked like, what the young men looked like. She saw the way that they interacted. She imagined, as she looked out at the people in the town around, that there was warmth, acceptance, love, inclusiveness, no exclusion. She didn't see people fighting and warring out there. And she wanted to know, what is that all about? It wasn't just that she went out to see them. She went out there to get to know them. She wanted to understand who they were, what kind of people they were. So she went out. Now just think. Think about the logistics that young lady had to deal with. Now, we can imagine she might have been a young teen. Think of the logistics. You're the one daughter of Jacob. Everybody is keeping an eye on you. Where is Dinah? Oh, there she is. Always keeping an eye. And so she had to know What was the routine of the servants? When would there be a break in activity so she could dart out of the encampment with nobody seeing her and out the door? And if you've got teenagers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. So she knew the rhythms of the family and of the encampment. She knew where the break points were, and she got out so that nobody could see her. Because, just consider it, would she have been allowed to go out into the city on her own? Just think about that, baby boom mother. Would you have let your child just pop on the bus and go into town at 15 years of age on her own? No, you wouldn't. Absolutely not. So what does that tell us then about this girl, if it happened that way? She's clever, perceptive, innovative, has high personal initiative, and a strong amount of self-confidence, because she knows what's going to happen when she comes back home. And she does not care, which means she has the strength of personality to withstand whoever yells at her to whatever extent. Do you have a firstborn child like that? You might. You might have a daughter like that. Right? And that's what this girl does. She goes out knowing full well what she's going to get back home. But just like Sarah in the matter of Hagar, and just like Rebekah ultimately in the matter of Isaac from the blessings, she didn't fully calculate or understand the risks. She had what all young people have, which is the sense of omniscience, knowing everything. The knowledge that their parents could not possibly have. And she knew that she'd be all right and she would take care of things and she'd take care of herself. Now, the next part of the story doesn't talk about her speaking with the young girls and what they said to her and what she said to them. Look at what it says. When Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her, he lay with her, he defiled her. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And he loved the damsel, and spake kindly unto the damsel. The words, they hurt to read. She went into the city. And though she thought she had control of the situation, she lost complete control of it. Now just think. This girl who has been treated like a princess all her life. And she is. She's a princess in the house of a king, of Jacob. And who looks around and she doesn't have a friend among the servants. All the little girls she plays with, she always feels that there's a distance between her and them. She's different to them. For the first time, goes into a town and sees a prince. A prince. And doubtless he would have been extremely good looking. For this to happen, he would have been charming and insightful about people. For this to happen also, he may have had attractive qualities in his personality. But in his society, he would have been spoilt likewise. And in a society, in the world, where the standards of behavior and of morality would have been way below anything Jacob would have talked about with his family. Shechem just did what's done in the world, in the order that it's done in. And look at the order. He took her, lay with her, defiled her, and then he falls in love with her. You just think about the order of those things. The whole thing is is topsy-turvy, isn't it? He doesn't fall in love with her and then do the right thing with her family and then move to the final act, the behavior, the thing that was done, that's described. That comes first. And in the world in which we are living in today, that seems to be the way things work. The last thing that people say to each other is, I love you. People jump into intimate relationships with each other with no commitment. And then they see how they like each other. How is this going? Well, maybe we'll stay together a bit. But there still isn't the I love you. And there's no commitment. There's no marriage. And then these things progress and progress. And then after a while, they say I love you. And then a long while after that, let's get married. And they build their prenuptial agreement. So they write out the death certificate for their marriage. And it's signed the day that they are married. That's what it is. If/when we are divorced, this is what we're going to each get. So Shechem was just doing what young men in this world do. And I'm sad to say, brothers and sisters, I'm very sad to have to say this. Young men in the truth sometimes too. And we need to remind our young men, as well as our young women, in this world of no morality, of low behavioral standards, of no honor in relationships between men and women, we need to remind them about what relationships are supposed to be. So that our young men are taught, you never, ever, ever push a young woman past a particular boundary line that she should not be pushed beyond. You don't do it. You don't do it for her, and you don't do it for you. And you don't do it for God. And so that our young women are taught the same thing. That does not mean that they will do what we've told them to do. But we've given them as much and as best we can a sense of the importance of this issue. The consequences if you go past. What could happen to you both? The responsibility and obligations that you have as these things happen and progress beyond a point of no return. So they know. Should they make these mistakes, as all of our children do these days. Now put yourself in the shoes of young Dinah. There you are in this absolute pitch blackness of emotional crisis. You've lost everything. You broke the rules, you outsmarted everybody, you got into town, and you were completely outsmarted and taken advantage of. You now know, I cannot go back home. I can't go to my mother and look her in the face after this. I can't go back home because of what my brothers will do. Now, what would my dad say? I'm an absolute mess. I've messed up everything I was raised with. And it's nobody else's fault but mine. The boy sees something in her. You know, young people that are raised in the truth, they don't know it. But there's something in them that makes them different, whether they leave or not, to the world outside. They may run far away from the truth and go out into that world, but there's something, Sunday school, ecclesial life, the readings, youth activities, Bible schools, all the things that they've done, in the truth. There's something that's been put into them that makes them different to the world outside. There's a depth of character that they have that is different to the superficiality and the sheeny glossiness of the world outside. Unlike the Christmas tree decorations that many people in the world seem to be, there's a weight to them and a substance to them that makes them attractive to people yearning for something deeper and richer than the skin-deep relationships that people specialize in the world today. That's what Shechem saw in this girl. Do you not think he had the run of all the beautiful girls of the town? Clearly, in doing what he did, that's what he did have. That's what he was used to. He could have any girl he wanted, anytime, anywhere. And it didn't matter whose daughter she was, because he was entitled to that. But he saw in Dinah something he had never, ever seen in a girl before. This was a woman of substance. Yes, she was conflicted. She was immature. There was all of the anger that would be put into the into the heart of a child, seeing ineffective parents and things wrong and broken in the family that were not addressed. There'd be all that in her, but something else would be in her, apart from her beauty. Something in her character that was deep and rich. And he wanted that. He wanted that enough that he was prepared to tune out all the potential marriages he could have had in that town so that he could unite his life with this young girl's. He could see that he had broken something in her. He had hurt her. He had wounded her. He was confused. He wasn't used to this kind of reaction. He'd had girls fight him off before, but that was just them doing what they did. And he would have what he wanted, and things would be okay somehow. But he knew he had broken something, and he felt deep pangs in his conscience as he watched her weep. As he watched the grief, he'd never seen grief like that in someone before. Ever. In no girl he'd ever been with. He didn't understand the grief. As he asked her and talked to her, and she told him what had just happened, and what that meant for her, and what that meant for her family, and who she is, and who her father is, and why this was something that was not going to be acceptable to her family. He began to understand something that was a different model to what he had grown up with. It was something that was entirely foreign to him. But he was a young man who had elements of good character in him too. And he had a conscience. And he felt very badly about what had happened. And he spoke kindly unto the damsel. Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field. And Jacob held his peace until they were come. So you're Jacob. The one daughter you have amongst all of the sons, in the midst of all the troubles of your life, all the troubles of your difficult, harsh, challenging life. That one little girl that you have, you've just heard, she went into the town unaccompanied, and she was raped. if you felt like you were an incompetent father before that point in time, how would you feel when you heard that? Well, we know how he felt because he's almost speechless. There's a little bit of an echo, an interesting echo. This goes back to the days of Rebekah. Rebekah was the daughter of Bethuel. But when you look at the narrative of Eleazar negotiating with the family, who negotiates with him? Laban and her mother. Bethuel recedes into the background. It's almost as if Rebekah had grown up with a father who was ineffective, who was not a leader, who couldn't guide, who was checked out mentally, emotionally, who wasn't always engaged and committed to the work and dealing with the messiness of family life. And so the mother and the son and the daughter picked up the slack. And they made things happen, and they worked things out. So when Rebekah does what she does with Isaac, she was used to taking control. She was used to seeing her mother and her brother take over because Bethuel might not have been an effective leader. And so what happens is, in this story, Jacob will recede into the background. And his voice will not be heard. And it's a telling moment. It shows us an aspect of the character of Jacob. And it also tells us how far this family had fallen from where a family ought to be to what it had become. Verse 6, and Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. The sons of Jacob came out of the field. When they heard it, they were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter. Now just pay attention to that. He had wrought folly, which thing ought not to be done. So here's a group of young men with all of their fighting, all of their competition with each other, all the fighting and ugliness in that family, who have a strong sense of the way things ought to be done. Sound familiar, brethren? Sometimes we're like that too. Sometimes we've got this strong sense of the way things ought to be done. And we're focused on one thing or two things that ought to be done, when everything else is falling apart and a mess. Everything else. So these young men, suddenly they're all about what ought to be done, the right things to do, and the things that should not be done, that are inappropriate, that are immoral. This ought not to be done. That's the attitude that they come from the field with. Hamor communed with them, saying, look, the soul, the heart, the very being of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. I pray you, give her him to wife. And make ye marriages with us. Give us your daughters. Give your daughters unto us. Take our daughters unto you. And ye shall dwell with us. And the whole land shall be before you. Dwell, trade ye therein, and get you possessions therein. So what's he doing? What is Hamor doing? Hamor, by the way, his name has an unfortunate meaning. It's donkey. It's ass. And so here is Hamor, like all the donkeys of Wall Street. And what is the essence of his negotiation? Here's all the things you can get if you let them get married. You can get this, get that, get this, get that. It's all before you. You can get all of these things. It's all about wealth and riches and materialism. Because that's what this town has to offer. It's the Christmas tree decoration that the world offers. It looks solid, everything looks good. Any pressure on it and it's gone. There's nothing in it but air. But space. And so he says all these things. And then Shechem said unto her father. Shechem talks to her father. And can you imagine? You are Jacob. And you are looking in the face of this boy that has raped your one little girl. And he's talking to him. And he says, let me find grace in your eyes. And what ye shall say unto me, I'll give. Ask me never so much dowry and gift. I'll give according as ye shall say unto me. But give me the damsel to wife. And there we see the full character of this boy to whom the truth could have been taught. This boy Shechem. Because he's willing to give everything he owns. Everything. So that this girl can be a part of his life. And he appeals. He knows what he has done. He knows what that means to her father. And yet he bravely puts himself forth. He doesn't put daddy in front of him. There's no helicopter daddy in front of him that's somehow negotiating on his behalf because my little 19-year-old can't speak for himself. The boy comes forward and humbles himself in front of the man whose daughter he took advantage of and whose heart he broke. But he's fallen in love with her. And he's apologizing and asking that he will extend this gift to him. And he'll give him anything he wants. Everything. It's all he knows to do. I'll give you something for it. Because that's what he was raised with. I mean, look at his dad. He grew up in Donkey Town, didn't he? And so it says, and the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully. And Jacob doesn't say anything. Why? Because he's crushed, but also, might it not be there was something he saw in this boy, something in him that made him think, maybe something good can come out of this. But in his confusion, he says nothing. And so the boys, who were never united for any purpose except to do evil together, or when they were hungry and had to go down into Egypt when famine came about, here they are united to do an act of evil, these boys. And what they say is, we can't do this thing, to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this will we consent unto you. If ye will be, as we be, that every male of you be circumcised, then will we give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us. We will dwell with you, and we will become one people. What have they just articulated? The promises made to Abraham. That's what they've done. They have taken the truth and preached it to these men as a foundation for a marriage, for a deal that they're making with them. That's what they've done. The uniting of Jew and Gentile. Circumcision to make one people. Well, what happens is Hamor runs back to the town. And look at Hamor. Look at Mr. Donkey, the negotiator. Look what he says. First of all, verse 19. And the young man deferred not to do the thing because he had delight in Jacob's daughter. And he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And Jacob saw that. Jacob saw something in that boy. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came into the gate of the city, communed with the men of their city, saying, These men are peaceable unto us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land, and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. They're brilliant negotiators. Hamor is absolutely brilliant as a negotiator. Let's take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us, for to dwell with us, to be one people. If every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised, shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be theirs? Every beast of theirs be ours? And the men said, what was that bit about the circumcision? What's that all about? And so they walk through with circumcision, there's no doubt. But he reaffirms, and this is all that we're going to get. Because in Donkey Town, what you get is what you've got. So everything that they can get, they're willing to put up with the pain to get that. What happens? It says, and unto these men, the men of the city hearkened. Every male was circumcised. All that went out of the gate of the city. And on the third day, when they were in the maximum amount of pain and incapacity, the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword, and came upon all the city boldly, and slew all the males. These are the men to whom they had preached the truth. These are the men who had been circumcised. It was as if they had taken people, and while they were baptizing them, held them under the water and drowned them. That's what these men did. Simeon and Levi. And then it says, and they slew Hamor, and Shechem his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went out. Can it not have been that Dinah saw the character that was in Shechem? Can it not have been that she would have thought of the promises and the fact that Jew and Gentile would be one people one day? Can it not have been that she thought, I can teach him the truth. He'll become a brother. It will all work out. Somehow it will work out. And when her brother came in with that sword and put it into the man that she had started to love, and when he grabbed her by the shoulder and shoved her in front of him and said, get out of here, and muttered the foul and filthy words that he might have muttered about his own sister, what would have been in her mind? I did all of this. I killed Shechem. It says, these men then took all the sheep, oxen, asses, everything that was in the city, everything that was in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones, and their wives, took they captive, and spoiled, which thing ought not to be done. These men of integrity showing their true character in what they actually did. They took the women. When Dinah went back home, bearing all the burden of the earth on her shoulders, and went into Leah's tent, and looked on Leah's face, and saw that she had added to all the pain that Leah already had a whole new overlay of anguish. What would our young sister have felt? I imagine her staying in her tent, barely ever coming out. The children of the family were not encouraged to go near Dinah's tent. Every once in a while, Dinah would come out from the gloom, the darkness of her tent, just to feel the sunshine on her face, and would see a woman of Shechem going by, a heavy burden of wood on her back, her clothes and rags, and one black eye. And their eyes would meet, and she would turn around and go back into her tent. Their eyes would meet, and she would turn around and go back into her tent. Their eyes would meet,